Now back to Smoke on the Water for more Straight Up with Sturge.
Welcome back in, 7:25 on this Monday night edition of Straight Up with Sturge, coming to you live from Smoke on the Water here in Greenville's historic West End District. Mark Sturgis, Price Atkinson, Ramona Ellison back at the station, keeping us up on the air and out of trouble and everything else she does. Let's go to the guest lines. Let's bring on the very, very talented writer from USA Today, Dan Wolken. Dan, how are we doing after what's been a pretty heavy information highway here the last 24 hours?
Well, let me first correct you. Talented is not one of the words I would use to describe myself or anyone would use to describe me, but I appreciate the gesture. That's very nice of you.
Well, let's start with, I felt you had one of the best, if not strongest, comments on all of Twitter and the internet last night after we had a little time to digest the bracketology and it had been released, that you felt like this may have been the worst seeding job ever that this tournament committee has done. What made you feel that way so fast after the release of these brackets? That what really caught your attention to make you feel that way?
Well, I just think the committee is so reliant on numbers, and I get it. I mean, look, the RPI is the metric that we all understand that is used in this process, and it's been like that for a long time. I get it, but you got to dig into the numbers a little bit deeper, and you have to look into it and say, not just the number beside the RPI name, but the team. Teams like UConn, which got a 7. UConn beat some really good teams this year. They had some great wins, and I thought they were certainly going to be a 5. At least. I just thought there were a lot of mistakes in the seeding. I thought the Atlantic 10 teams got overseeded, especially the ones that didn't play all that well down the stretch. I don't know. I didn't like the job they did in seeding the bracket, but at the end of the day, we all forget about that. By Wednesday, it doesn't really matter. The games start, and you got to go play.
Dan, Price Atkinson sitting in with Mark tonight. Really appreciate you joining us. And as you said, every year there's going to be some we're gonna argue about who was in that should have been out, and vice versa. Who should have been seated here that wasn't. And I certainly agree there was just some really, I think, poor job on a few of the teams. But I want to ask you a couple questions in regard to seeding. Worst job in terms of the worst. The single worst instance of seeding in this tournament, Louisville is a number 4 seed or UMass is a 6 seed?
Yeah, I don't understand the UMass seed at all. But, you look at the RPI, they went 7-4 against the top 50. That's on paper, that's a pretty good record. And, I think the committee values that. But there's no other metric by which you would look at UMass's season and put them into the top 24 teams in the country, which is what it suggests by getting a 6 seed. But, again, this goes back to, and I get it. I mean, the committee wants to do a whole body of work. UMass racked up some wins early. They beat Nebraska. They beat New Mexico. They beat BYU. Those are really good RPI wins, but I think you start to look when they got in their conference, down the stretch, they didn't play as well. They played themselves out of the top 25, and the Ken Pom ratings, I don't even know if they're in the top 40. So again, I mean, it's just sort of a mystery to me how they ended up with a 6. I would have thought they were somewhere around an 8.
Well, while those two teams, to me, kind of stood out as the ones where were the head turners, there were a couple others where you can move them a line or two, and I'd probably be okay with it. But, were there some other teams, what were some other instances that you just saw as maybe real head turners in terms of seeding just being poor? And also, when you talk about the whole body of work, that Ron Wellman talked about last night and in other interviews today about, going back and looking at the non-conference portion of the schedule and the totality of your work. But it really doesn't seem at all like the eye test was really even factored in at all.
Well, and look, I don't necessarily mind that, because when you talk about the eye test, I think it's you have to be very careful because a lot of these teams are inconsistent. And so what day did you see them? You look at a team like Texas. I mean, if you saw them at home against Kansas, they looked great. If you saw them at the next week against TCU, they didn't look so good. The eye test can be tricky. It can be game to game, and I don't know that I necessarily trust that. So, to me, I don't mind necessarily going off accomplishment and numbers. I just don't know that they even got that correct. But again, I mean, this is all not. This is you're projecting sort of what human beings are going to think about teams, and it's just very hard. It's very hard to predict. Very hard to project.
We're talking with Dan Wolken from USA Today. You can follow him on Twitter at Dan Wolken. I highly recommend you do that if you haven't already. And Dan, as a whole, I felt like the American Athletic Conference was more or less looked down upon in this seeding. I mean, Louisville gets a 4 seed, and Cincinnati a 5 against Harvard, and all the way down to an 8 seed with Memphis. Why do you think that came across? Because those are 4 good programs. Was it more of a case that the American Athletic Conference was still a mystery in its first year, or why weren't they given the benefit of the doubt? Because those are 4 well-known programs.
Well, and also SMU got snubbed, and if you look at you look at a lot of the analytic ratings, that's a team that could probably beat a lot of teams in the tournament. But look, I think the biggest problem the American Athletic Conference had is that in the non-conference season, Louisville didn't really contribute much to the league's overall profile. They didn't schedule very well out of conference, and they didn't get any big non-conference wins. They lost to North Carolina, and they lost to Kentucky. The best non-conference wins that they got, UConn beat Florida, and then Memphis beat Gonzaga and Oklahoma State. And then you look beyond that, there wasn't a whole lot of great wins. Cincinnati, they beat Nebraska, they beat Pitt, who were sort of lower-level tournament teams, but they didn't have any just pop, standout win. SMU didn't win any big non-conference games. So I think that probably had more to do with it than any sort of bias or disrespect. I just think they looked at the overall non-conference part of it and saw that there weren't a whole lot of big wins there, and then the bottom of the league was not very good, obviously.
We're talking about the AAC, American Athletic Conference, and I was kind of really surprised at what had the committee looking so favorably and high on the new Big East and the Atlantic 10. That kind of caught me by surprise, but what really caught me by surprise was when you look at the Dayton, which the first 4 gets going tomorrow night, I was really kind of surprised that Iowa dropped all the way into the play-in games, if you will, the first 4, and while BYU's sitting there as a 10, even all the while losing their second leading scorer in the championship of the West Coast Conference Final.
Well, look, I mean, the one thing that you have to take into consideration with BYU is that they're always hard to sort of deal with if they're on the bubble because they can't play on Sunday. So that limits that limits where you can put them in the bracket. That's one issue with BYU, and that may have contributed to why they got a 10. I'm not exactly sure on that, but the A10 certainly got a lot of respect. No question about it. I mean, the Big East teams that got good seeds, Creighton, I think you can look at it and say they deserved it. Villanova, they only had, I think, 4 losses on the season, so they deserved a 2 seed. But yeah, the A10 certainly, I didn't understand why St. Louis got a 5. When you look at what they did non-conference, it wasn't all that impressive. I don't understand why VCU got a 5, why UMass got a 6. But again, I mean, these are hard things to sort of predict, and they rely a lot on the numbers. And the RPI was very favorable to the Atlantic 10 this year, so they got the benefit of the doubt.
We're talking with Dan Wolken from USA Today, and Dan, now that we can start looking ahead to Tuesday and Wednesday and really the rest of the week, when you start filling out a bracket, are you looking? Do you go by gut? Do you start looking at some historical data? I mean, right now I'm surprised that everybody seems to be picking Michigan State. They're hot, no doubt, and they're healthy. That being said, would you use the fact that only one Big Ten tournament champ has gone on to win an NCAA title over the course of that Big Ten tournament, or do you start picking things by feel and gut at this point?
I'll be honest with you, I'm so bad at it over the years. I have a strategy, and if I did, I'd probably just go the opposite.
Right.
Because I've been so poor over the years picking this thing. I mean, there's always upsets, and most of the time they're not ones we see coming. It's 40-minute basketball games, which are unpredictable, with amateur athletes. So it's just hard. It's just really hard. I don't know that any historical data is really all that relevant, especially in this era where there's more parity. And I just think all of these games, regardless of seeding, tend to be pretty even. I mean, you're talking about 4 to 5 point spreads on a lot of these games, which, it's just a 2-possession swing. I mean, and, one team makes more threes than normal, and it doesn't matter what seed they are, they're going to have a chance to win. So, I don't know. I mean, there's just such a randomness to this NCAA tournament. At the end of the day, I tend to think the best 4 or 5 teams sort of emerge, and the talent comes through. But, along the way, a lot of very good teams are going to lose to teams we don't consider necessarily great teams, and I just don't know. Gut is probably as good a way to do it as throwing darts.
Dan, when I look at the bracket and you look at the different regions, I look at go to the Midwest, and everybody's making a really big deal about Wisconsin or Wichita State's been given this murderer's row of teams to face, and I'm kind of the mind and body that when it comes to the NCAA tournament, look, you got to earn it. And, whether you're Wichita State or not, there's just oftentimes going to be one of these regions that kind of stands out optically on paper as being really tough. But when you look at the Midwest region, do you see it as being the toughest region and the toughest road for a 1 seed?
I mean, the Midwest is pretty tough too, I guess. But, look, at the end of the day, you don't have to play every team in the region. You only got to play 4 to get to the Final Four. So, I don't see why we get all upset about all this, because we don't know who's going to win all these games. Yeah, if all the favorites win, sure, it's a tough path to the Final Four. Is that going to happen? Hardly ever does. So let's see what Wichita State's path actually is before we say it was unfair. And again, I mean, they don't have to play everybody. They're not going to have to play Duke and Michigan. They're going to have to at most play one or the other, and may not even have to play either of them. That's just how this tournament works. So people get all hyped up about it on the night of Selection Sunday, but the truth is, I think all that's overrated. And like you said, getting to the Final Four requires some luck, and you're going to have to beat good teams sooner or later. I mean, last year they got to the Final Four. They beat a 1 seed in Gonzaga. They got to the Sweet 16 and had a 13 seed in LaSalle. So. They got a break there, so I don't know. I just don't buy into all that.
Yeah, Dan, before we let you go, I know we're getting short on time. Really appreciate you joining us, but I want to ask you, as a Kentucky guy sitting here, you've covered John Calipari from your time at the Memphis Commercial Appeal when he was coaching at Memphis, and you've obviously still covered him when he's at UK. And a lot of my Kentucky friends are critical of me for being critical of this team in my university where I went to school. But going back to this ludicrous 40-0 comment that John Calipari made in the summer, which I just thought was one of the stupidest things he's ever said, in hyping up a team of freshmen that you really just don't know what you're going to get. But when you look at them the way they're playing, you hear this buzz, Wichita State and Kentucky potentially in the second round. I'm just personally not convinced that they're even going to get past Kansas State. I think even an 8 seed was a little too high, to be real frank about Kentucky. What do you think about them as far as their road and a potential matchup with Wichita State and even their first round game against Kansas State?
Yeah, I don't understand all the Kentucky people and Calipari complaining about the seed. I mean, they lost 10 games. And they didn't really have a lot of good wins. They beat Louisville, and that was a very good win early in the season. But their second best win was Providence. Their third best win was
Yep.
Tennessee, who was in the playing game. So when you have 10 losses and you don't have a lot of good wins, I mean, that's about a profile of an 8 seed. So I didn't understand the complaining about that. I thought they would maybe get up to a 6 or a 7 just based on Kentucky getting the benefit of the doubt, but they didn't, and here we are. They haven't performed all that well this year for whatever reason. Maybe they're going to make this incredible run, but yeah, I mean, the hyping of 40-0 was obviously a mistake. It was obviously not realistic, and I don't know if it had a negative effect on this team, but I think the guys who are in that program right now, I wonder if they sort of embrace the whole Kentucky vibe. Just sort of being on that stage, the swagger, the attention, people wanting to take pictures with them, the autographs, all those things. I don't know if they embrace it as much as maybe some previous teams that Calipari's had there. But I think Cal obviously has been frustrated by this team and why it hasn't played to its potential. And he's tried to convince himself that they've got it in him to make a run. And you know what? If I had 5 first-round picks, I probably would too. But yeah, I think if they get by Kansas State, I'll tell you what, Wichita State is just physically more mature, physically tougher, and has a higher basketball IQ than that team. And I think that I don't see them getting by Wichita. I really don't.
Well, Dan, as we let you go, can you give us your final 4 teams and also tell our listeners they can follow you on Twitter at Dan Wolken and where you'll be this weekend and what you'll be working on?
Well, I'm in Orlando covering the regional there. In terms of picking a Final Four, I mean, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'm not any smarter than anybody else.
But everybody stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night, Dan.
Right. I'm sort of thinking Kansas and Iowa State on that one side of the bracket because I just really respect what the Big 12 did this year. I'm thinking this is the year Wisconsin maybe breaks through and gets there, and out of the Midwest, Louisville I think is got actually a pretty good draw. So that's my Final Four, but I don't know. I reserve the right to change and be wrong.
Absolutely, I do up until tip-off tomorrow night. Well, thank you for your time. Have a great opening weekend of what's one of the best events in all of athletics, and enjoy your St. Patrick's Day tonight.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right,
Dan.
that's Dan Wolken, the national writer for USA Today, and on site down there in Orlando. Matter of fact, we should have told him to hook up with Matt Marshall, our good college football writer buddy that will be there for the Orlando Sentinel, covering that event as well. All right, Price, let's go ahead and go out to break. If you want to get in with us in the next segment before we have on Nicole Auerbach at the top of that, coming out of the top of the hour, please feel free to do so. Also, we'll start looking at some of the historical data that we've come across in notes as we prepare you for that next interview, because quite frankly, if you haven't filled out your brackets yet, you want to catch up with some of the info Nicole's going to be bringing us in the following segment.
Yeah, in USA Today, if you haven't checked out USA Today's coverage, I mean, just a ton of, what you can find it anywhere you go to, any of your sports websites, ESPN, CBS. USA Today has just got a great hub of NCAA tournament primers, bracket by region by region breakdown. Looking at Nicole's column today, or her story about the anatomy of an upset, looking at the tournament, what you look for when filling out your bracket. They got a lot of good videos, kind of bracket 101, bracketology 101.
Always pick a 12 over a 5. You got to figure out which one, but things of that nature. All right, let's get out to break. We are WCCP Talk Sports 104.9 FM, the flagship station of Clemson Athletics.